from Kansas State University. This is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and coming up today, K-State's Dan O'Brien, talking about the market response to this week's hard winter wheat tour of Kansas and the surrounding area, and about another week of brisk export business for U.S. corn during Dan's weekly segment on the grain market trends. Also today, K-State's Sarah Lancaster discussing a trio of timely crop weed management topics. Planning for pre-harvest control of excessive broadleaf weed growth in that wheat, contending with the expanding problem of windmill grass in crop fields, and a heads up on a herbicide tank mix issue for those of you growing dicamba-resistant soybeans this year. Later, of course, on Kansas agricultural weather, K-State's Mary Knapp, and more on Agriculture Today.
Make hand washing a healthy habit everywhere you go. Wash your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds, especially after going to the bathroom, before, during, and after preparing food, and before eating. If soap and water aren't available, use a hand sanitizer that has at least 60% alcohol. Life is better with clean hands. A message from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Good to have you along with us once again for another Agriculture Today. Well, the grain markets are feeding off of several things this week, and the wheat market in particular taking due note of that hard winter wheat tour that just wrapped up here in Kansas and adjacent states yesterday. We'll bring that into the discussion, of course, as we talk grain market trends with K-State Research and Extension grain market economist Dan O'Brien. And Dan, as per that tour, if the numbers that were projected are realized, and want to ultra-stress the word if, we're looking at a sizable crop in Kansas, and the markets took note.
Yes. On the positive side, if we get a crop of that size and the quality is decent, it'll be a help to tight supply-demand situations for the feed grains and for wheat. In fact, when those report numbers came out, there was a crossover impact from the hard red winter wheat market over into the feed grain futures corn. And, of course, both corn and sorghum were affected. It's interesting to me that as we rolled out of the May contract into the July contract, that the July contract did not change that much, down about 20 cents. But yeah, in the closing throes of that delivery period, we saw a lot of amazing price action on that May contract before it went off the board. And you compare that, the July contract for corn at $6.64.5 on yesterday's close, compare that to hard red wheat, again, coming into the harvest period in our part of the world at $6.25. So you have basically $6.64.5 to $6.25, 40-cent differential. And that differential, in most cases, especially out to the west in the feeding areas, gets exacerbated by the time that you add the basis in on that. And for instance, in the areas where it makes the most difference, where we'd be feeding, we're most likely to feed wheat as that crop would come in and be available for use. You've got prices in Garden City, first and foremost, at $6.07 cash price and cash corn at $7.24, a ratio of 84%. That's per bushel. If you scale that down to per pound basis, it's 10.5 cents a pound for wheat, 12 some for corn. So you're at an 87% ratio. And very similar situations, not quite as dramatic. In Colby, $6 wheat, $7.04 cash corn. Hutchinson, quite the hot area. You know, a lot of times you don't pay attention to that, but for weeks now, that's been a strong grain market. And $6.25 hard red winter wheat, $7.13 for cash corn. And you have other more export-oriented areas, not as much feedlot action. Again, Salina, Topeka, Hutchinson, all major grain terminal areas, strong exports. Yeah, we still have corn prices higher than wheat, but percentages generally aren't quite as high, in terms of the differential. So how the markets responded were with the idea that we'll have a good wheat crop. And I think judiciously, as you read the media reports, people out of Kansas wheat and elsewhere were saying, yes, this looks awfully good now, but we would be still vulnerable to hot dry weather, the microwaving effect of
Right.
wheat out in western Kansas, where we get 90, 95 degree plus 20 mile an hour winds, that can do a lot to succulently growing wheat. So that risk is still out there with rainfall. We've got disease issues to watch. I'm sure our agronomic brethren have been, and KSU have been talking about all that. So point is that as we sit right now, if you assume normal weather and no malady hitting the crop, we'd have a good wheat crop. And frankly, in supply-demand balances of these grains in the U.S. are looking awfully tight coming through the summer. It'd be a welcome thing for the sake of not having us have to shut down usage industries just because we had nothing to put through. That'd be my thought on it, Eric.
Picking up on corn for a moment and demand once again, just can't ignore what's happening with corn sales abroad. And again, the big stick there is China. More numbers are affirming that, Dan.
We're sitting at about 190 million bushels sold, pre-sold on the week ending May the 6th. Here, the week ending May the 13th, we're up to 351. So we gained about 150, 160 million bushels of pre-sales into that next market. And as we backtrack where those sales have gone, they're credited to China largely. So China's buying ahead for the next marketing year. And they bought on a price break, which would be what any shrewd buyer would do. Got a price break, they bought. Well, what a deal. That makes sense. I would say that even with that action out there down the road, for the next marketing year starting September 1st, this week we had 88 million bushels of exports. We need 60 to 61 per week to meet the USDA's projection. So, if we keep up a pace like that, then you'll end up and have the USDA exports higher yet again in this marketing year, and it would tighten up that old crop balance sheet. What happens is I think by the time we get within 3, 4, 5 weeks of the end of the old crop marketing year come August 31st, will they stay the course on what they have on the books, or will they just roll into the new? And if they do, it just strengthens the new crop contract for D's corn. So we'll see. Interesting times. I would say also, since we're talking feed grains a little bit, cash prices, we still have strong cash prices for both corn and grain sorghum. But right now, for instance, in Colby, you've got cash corn at 704, cash sorghum at 679. Tremendous price, but it's not on top of corn like it was when we had such a strong pace of export demand. And you look at Salina, 674 corn, 654. That's not that much of a differential, 18 cents, but that's an export-oriented area. Garden City, 724 versus 674. Again, in the areas where we're more in-house or in-area usage-oriented, a little more of a spread in areas, Salina, Topeka, et cetera, you're still holding up very well for grain sorghum. We're actually holding up for grain sorghum very well across the state. You just see differentials according to areas to the degree.
Yeah. Robust times for the feed grains still, although there's been this pare back in prices to an extent in recent weeks.
I should add one thing. In southeast Kansas, you have grain sorghum at 724 and corn at 713. So again, that you're pulling into the southeast markets, and I guess I'm learning something this year, that there are elements of feed rations heading off into those areas that fit well for sorghum, and they've held sorghum up. That's more a domestic demand issue, it seems to me, than an international.
On that soybean front, Dan, once more interest in what's happening with exports there, and moreover, what appears to be a very healthy South American crop contributing to the supply.
Well, that's right. I think we've got the vote on what the market thinks about the supply-demand balances in the world and in the U.S. on what's coming. When you look at what's happened to prices in the last 2 weeks, we had gotten up to a tremendous price of about $16.60 for a day or so. Spent some time at about $16.40, but then have dropped off now to $15.33, and we said dropped off to $15.33. Still tremendous prices and tight supply-demand issues in the world, et cetera. Again, so you wake up, you look at the ag news, and talk of a Argentine pork strike or something going on, and just things to roil up the market at a time that, as labor and businesses down in some of those areas go back and forth in trying to improve their positions. And shipments at a pace of about 12.3 million bushels, need about 12.5 to reach the USDA's projection. Of course, USDA's projection is 2.280, and that's a great pace for exports. We are sitting at about 166 million bushels that are purchased for that next marketing year going forward, again, beyond September 1st. And the USDA is projecting about 2.275 billion. So one thing to consider is that we're going to end up this year with really, really, really tight ending stocks. Our beginning stocks next year are going to be really tight. And although we're not paying much attention to it now, if you go on to our U.S. Drought Monitor websites and check out what the weather conditions are, other than in these areas in the very central part of the U.S. and not where we're at in the central and southern plains, all these other areas are dry. They're not doing great. Rains can come, that can all change. But here we're sitting May 21st, and crops are generally in, et cetera. Got some rain, but it's pretty dry in those areas. I think we'll just need to be watching this in coming weeks, heading on into late May, into June and July, and see how some of these dry areas that have emerged are holding up. But if they don't, it'll just make for volatility.
The reality of it is these are going to be jumpy markets as we look at the ever-changing expectations for those summer crops moving forward. That's what's ahead, by and large.
Yep. And when the markets move lower, as they have here recently, we get a bunch of buying activity. So apparently we have unconvinced foreign buyers that prices are going to be going down. If they thought that, they wouldn't buy. But now when we have price breaks, they're buying. So that says a lot about the world's attitude towards U.S. crops.
All right. Well, we keep up with it weekly, and in this time slot, as well as with your notes on the markets, which are posted each Friday on the agmanager.info website. So producers have a look at all of this in more detail right there. Dan, thanks for the input as always.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
Our regular Friday guest, talking grain market trends, K-State Research and Extension grain market economist Dan O'Brien, and this is Agriculture Today.
When a thunderstorm approaches, follow these safety tips. Lightning, known as the underrated killer, usually strikes the tallest objects, so avoid standing beneath trees or other isolated tall objects. Take shelter in a sturdy building. Remember, if you're close enough to hear thunder, you're close enough to be struck by lightning. Help keep you and your family safe this severe weather season. For the National Weather Service, I'm Bill Curtis.
Agriculture Today continues now, and here we'll pick up on a handful of topics on weed control. We brought by once more weed management specialist Sarah Lancaster of K-State Research and Extension. And these are independent, but we'll get into each and every one of them, Sarah, as we talk here, including pre-harvest weed control for wheat. And this comes to mind because of the significant wet weather we've seen around Kansas, which naturally prompts weed growth.
That's right, Eric. So we have had a lot of rain. And, the other things to think about is the reports coming in from the wheat tour about some of these wheat stands are a little bit thin because of disease issues and things like that. So as we get into some warmer temperatures with abundant moisture and some opportunity for weeds to grow, we can maybe see a little worse than normal weed pressure as we move towards wheat harvest and need to think about getting those guys out of the way so that we can harvest efficiently.
We're talking about an assortment of usually broadleaf weeds here, are we not?
That's right. So things that come to mind would be horseweed or mare's tail. We always talk about Palmer amaranth. It's starting to come up in the fields around here. And so as we, again, think about warmer weather coming along, it will definitely be lurking in the wheat canopy. I'm just looking for an opportunity to start to grow.
We're talking about this here, still a few weeks away from harvest time, because producers will want to map out a strategy, including product selection?
That's right, Eric. If folks decide that they want to apply an at-harvest herbicide, there are some things that they're going to want to think about. First, obviously, is what weeds they're going after. Another thing would be how long it takes the herbicide to act. So some of the herbicides that are labeled for harvest weed control in wheat act pretty quickly within a few days, and some take a little longer, a week or two. So knowing that. And then the other really important thing to think about that we don't often consider with agronomic crops is the pre-harvest interval. So some of these products have a little bit longer waiting period after application and before you can legally harvest and sell the grain, just to make sure we don't have herbicide residues coming through in that grain as we process it for consumption.
Where do those pre-harvest intervals typically fall in regard to the length of those?
A lot of them are about a week. So as we think about things that folks might want to use, things like dicamba or glyphosate, those have a 7-day waiting period. Something like Sharpen only has a 3-day waiting period. And so if you make your decision late, that may be something to think about. Sharpen's going to act a little bit faster on your weeds, and it's also going to have a little bit of a shorter waiting period as well. So again, scouting. Just good agronomics and boots on the ground is one of the most important things you need to do before you really make this decision.
And it really is tricky because that growth can come on so fast that you can breach these limitations before you even know it.
That's right. We're kind of hinted at this at the beginning of this conversation, Eric. We're moving into this time of year where the weeds are going to grow very quickly once the sun decides to come out and we start to get some heat units accumulating. With all the moisture, things, weeds and crops alike, are really going to progress quickly.
Wheat growers, be thinking about the need for that pre-harvest herbicide application, and be, as Sarah says, looking over your fields and seeing the early signs of that growth and prepare accordingly. Sarah, you have brought to our attention something that's sort of emerged on the scene here. It's not a new weed by any stretch, but it seems to be spreading in its scope here in Kansas. Windmill grass. What's the story?
Yeah, like you said, Eric, windmill grass is not a new problem. And it's really not a new problem for our no-till farmers. They've been struggling with this since we started to widely adopt no-till throughout the central and western parts of Kansas. So I got several calls last week on tumble windmill grass control in no-till fields going to crops ranging from soybeans to corn to grain sorghum. So, it's a problem for folks that are producing a variety of crops. And it's a tough one for me because there's not a good herbicide option.
What we're talking about here, for clarity, what results in tumbleweeds, in effect, right?
Yeah, so let's take a step back. Sure, Eric. Tumble windmill grass, it's a perennial grass. It does have stolons. One of the farmers I was visiting with had heard that it has rhizomes. It's a little bit of a technical difference, but it does. The stolons will be a little less concerning as far as control than a plant that has rhizomes. So tumble windmill grass, it's a perennial, it's a warm season. It's super difficult to control because it has very narrow leaves. They're even folded, so there's not a lot of surface area. And one of the other things that makes it difficult to control, Eric, is that it does not move herbicides like glyphosate around in the plant once it starts to tiller. So there's some data from the early 2000s where they report really great control in the field with glyphosate and some other herbicides. But the thing is, that was on tumble windmill grass that they had seeded the fall before. So where folks run into trouble is when they're trying to control these stands that have overwintered and perenniated, become perennial. And so it's just a tough situation. One of the most successful things that farmers have reported doing is just a single tillage event with a sweep plow. And so some of the researchers at Hayes actually looked at that in one of their long-term tillage experiments, and they found that they were able to reduce the windmill grass enough that their wheat yields were acceptable. But the pushback you get on that a lot of times is that, well, I've been in no-till for so long, I don't want to lose all of the things that I have gained in terms of, aggregate stability, organic carbon, things like that. So the interesting thing that Augustine and John reported in their paper is that single tillage event actually didn't have any negative effects on some of those key soil indicators that folks look at when they think about some of the advantages of no-till or reduced till. You're
talking about a one-time rescue, if you will, against windmill grass.
That's right. So a one-time rescue is a great term to use, Eric. So sort of resetting this, wiping the slate clean, resetting the system. And then after that, scouting. Man, again, second time in the last few minutes I've said that, Eric. Boots on the ground and just, because as you indicated, it is one of the tumbleweeds. So the seed head of this plant will separate and will scatter the seeds around. So we can see some spread that way. And also one of the ways that folks see spread is that it will just kind of expand. It's a perennial with stolon, so it creeps along from the edge of the field. And so really paying attention to the borders of your field can be important as you think about keeping this weed out of your systems.
And once more, it's showing up in places other than the high plains of Kansas, elsewhere likewise. So watch for windmill grass and think about managing against it, recognizing that herbicide treatments may not help all that much against it.
That's right.
Sarah, you have one more thing you wanted to pass along today, and it's word you're getting from elsewhere that might be of interest to our growers here in Kansas. There is an issue with a certain tank mix incompatibility. What's the background here?
So, as you know, as our listeners are aware, the South is a little bit ahead of us in terms of their cropping systems. And so they're looking at farmers going out with post-emergent applications in dicamba-resistant soybeans. And so one of the new requirements for using dicamba over the top in dicamba-resistant soybeans this year was having to add a volatility reduction agent, or VRA, into the tank mix. So there's two types of VRAs. One is the Vapor Grip Extra, which you're going to find under a variety of branded names. The other is Centris. The one we're talking about today and kind of concerned about today is Centris. The reports that we're getting and the photographic evidence that we're getting is that tank mixes that include Centris and Roundup result in a chemical interaction that is reminiscent of the baking soda volcano that my 8-year-old created over the winter. So obviously very exciting for an 8-year-old in my kitchen, not so cool for somebody trying to get a field of soybeans sprayed in a timely manner, because the other thing we should talk about is just a reminder about that June 30 cutoff date for soybeans in that application.
Once more, if one is using glyphosate with dicamba in these combinations on dicamba-resistant soybeans, that's where the trouble ensues with this particular volatility agent.
Yep, so that volatility reduction agent. So the reports that we're getting are that the problem is occurring with the Centris volatility reduction agent. The problem is not occurring with the other volatility reduction agents. So that's basically what we're calling Vapor Grip Extra, but it's under a slew of different brand names from different distributors.
Well, it's that simple. It's a heads up to producers and to their applicators, and they should both be discussing this and be aware of it.
That's absolutely right, Eric. Absolutely.
By the way, Sarah keeps a steady flow of information on weed management going on the Agronomy E-Update newsletter on matters like these and several others, and we'd advise you to stay on top of all of that by checking out that newsletter weekly. It's posted on Thursday afternoons at agronomy.ksu.edu. Well, likely there'll be more that comes up as we move forward deeper into this growing season, Sarah. We'll have you back at that point. Many thanks to you.
Thanks, Eric.
That from weed management specialist, K-State Research and Extension, Sarah Lancaster. After the break, today's agricultural news headlines, and on the Kansas Wheat Scoop with Marcia Boswell, a complete recap of that hard winter wheat tour this past week across Kansas. And still ahead, Mary Knapp on Kansas agricultural weather. You're tuned to Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate. Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today from the campus of Kansas State University. Eric Atkinson here, and now over to today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. Canadian Pacific is now urging Kansas City Southern to reject Canadian National's rival $33.5 billion takeover bid. It still refuses, though, to increase its own $25 billion bid. Canadian Pacific maintained yesterday that Canadian National's bid would not be approved by regulators because it would hurt competition and add to rail congestion around Chicago. So the CEO of Canadian Pacific, Keith Creel, doesn't see a need to increase its offer. Canadian Pacific had said combining Kansas City Southern and Canadian National would hurt the competition because those companies have rail lines that compete for business between the Midwest and the Gulf Coast. Canadian Pacific's network connects to Kansas City Southern near its headquarters in Kansas City, Missouri, but those two railroads do not overlap elsewhere. Canadian National has said it doesn't believe its offer would hurt competition and is confident that it could address any competitive concerns later in the Surface Transportation Board's review process. Canadian National said it will now work to complete the deal with Kansas City Southern. The USDA has issued a report that details efforts toward climate-smart agriculture and forestry. The USDA's Stephanie Ho has details.
USDA has issued a 90-day progress report on climate-smart agriculture and forestry.
Big announcement today. We have this report out. There's quite a bit in there, a lot of details.
That was Bill Hohenstein, director of USDA's Office of Energy and Environmental Policy. He says there are 7 main areas.
Data and metrics, how we make sure these strategies work for all farms and all farmers, how we integrate these things into our programs, how we enhance and encourage improved technical assistance and deal with some of the gaps we have there, how we leverage private interest and maximize the benefits of these emerging private sector markets.
Other areas include
how we improve forest health and then how we revitalize and re-energize our research program.
Information about the report can be found online at usda.gov under Media and Press Releases. It outlines some of USDA's plans to work along with President Biden's executive order on tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
And want to mention here that K-State Research and Extension will be hosting numerous local winter wheat variety plot tours over the coming weeks. You can see and learn about the newest available and upcoming wheat varieties at each of these. Here's a quick rundown of what's on the schedule for next week. On Monday the 24th, there's a tour set for near Tampa in Marion County. Also on Monday, one near Lorain in Ellsworth County. Then on Tuesday, the 25th, the Cottonwood Extension District will conduct 2 plot tours, one in Barton County, just outside of Great Bend, and the other due north of Victoria in Ellis County. Then on Wednesday, the 26th, the Post Rock Extension District will conduct 3 tours, one near Osborne in Osborne County, near Barnard in Lincoln County, and south of Beloit in Mitchell County. Also on Wednesday, then, a tour in far northern Riley County, northwest of Randolph. On Thursday, the 27th, the Walnut Creek Extension District with 3 tours, west of La Crosse in Rush County, south of Ness City in Ness County, and due west of Dighton in Lane County. Then a week from today, Friday the 28th, 3 tours as well in the Central Kansas Extension District, one near Mentor and one west of Solomon, both of those in Saline County, and the other near Minneapolis in Ottawa County. Again, touch base with the respective extension offices in these locations for specific directions and wheat tour start times. Take full advantage of those opportunities. Now it's on to this week's edition of the Kansas Wheat Scoop, and awaiting with that is Marcia Boswell. Marcia?
The 2021 Wheat Quality Council's Hard Winter Wheat Tour across Kansas wrapped up on May 20th. During the 3 days of wheat scouting, tour participants traveled 6 routes from Manhattan to Colby to Wichita and back to Manhattan. This year's tour hosted 45 participants from 13 states while traveling across the state. The 3-day average yield for the fields that were calculated was 58.1 bushels per acre. While an estimated 7.3 million acres of wheat were planted in the fall, the Kansas wheat crop varies in condition based on planting date and amount of moisture received. What Mother Nature has in plan for the wheat crop still remains to be seen, but the tour captures a moment in time for the yield potential for fields across the state. This year's tour was held several weeks later in May than the tour traditionally takes place. This year, more than half of the fields had already headed, so attendees were able to use a late-season formula to calculate yields based on number of wheat heads, number of spikelets, and kernels per spikelet. These formulas are provided by USDA's National Agricultural Statistics Service. The formulas do not take into consideration variables such as weed pressure, disease, and pests. Tour scouts saw evidence of wheat streak mosaic virus, stripe rust, Russian wheat aphid, and other diseases. The most noted disease pressure was stripe rust, and many fields had been sprayed with a fungicide. In early May, fields across the state, especially in the southwest, south central, and west central Kansas, were severely drought-stressed. Rain moved across Kansas during the first 2 weeks of May, with some locations receiving up to 8 inches of rain. Tour participants saw wet fields along the routes, with water standing in many fields. This rain was welcome relief and improved crop conditions significantly. The official tour projection for total production of wheat to be harvested in Kansas is 365 million bushels. This number is the average of estimated predictions from tour participants who gathered information from 350 fields across the state. Based on May 1st conditions, NASS predicted the crop to be 331 million bushels, with a yield of 48 bushels per acre. This year, the evening crop discussions were live-streamed on Kansas Wheat's YouTube channel. This gave members of the industry, including international buyers who weren't able to travel to Kansas for the tour, an opportunity to get a look at this year's hard winter wheat crop during this current snapshot in time. While the much-needed moisture improved the outlook of the Kansas wheat crop, these fields are still 4 to 7 weeks from harvest. A lot can happen during that time to affect final yields and production. For Kansas Wheat, I'm Marcia Boswell.
Thanks, Marcia. And for those of you itching to get that long overdue field work done and looking for an extended break in the damp weather conditions, you'll have to wait a while. That's the word from K-State's Mary Knapp, and she'll be in shortly to fill us in on the very latest Kansas agricultural weather outlook, right here on Agriculture Today.
With the shortage of primary care physicians, especially in rural areas, health education and disease prevention are vital. K-State research and extension programs address quality of life, personal development, and health behaviors across all life stages of all social economic groups. To learn more about health education, one of K-State Research and Extension's 5 grand challenges, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Closing out this Agriculture Today, the latest from the Kansas agricultural weather scene coming your way now, as alongside once again is research and extension climatologist here at K-State, Mary Knapp, and coming off a cloudy and a damp week, Mary, but the upside of that is that we apparently, as of the past week or so, have dispensed with most of the drought in Kansas.
We have, in fact. What you see across in the latest U.S. drought monitor is abnormally dry conditions. Some places out in western Kansas saw 2 categories improvement on that. And that's not surprising given the amounts of rain that were reported in that area. Tribune comes out as noteworthy. They had 5.66 inches in a single day. Their normal for an entire year is just over 18 inches. So they went a long way towards filling their total in just that time. And there was more over the week. It was not just that single rain event.
And they weren't alone. There were other areas, western Kansas and elsewhere for that matter, with substantial rainfall totals.
Right. Again, quite a few places that had over 5 inches of rain, more that had in the 3-inch plus category. Tribune wasn't the only area that saw flooding either. There was flooding across the state in different locations. So some places got too much at a time, and some places didn't quite get what they were hoping for. In particular, we'll talk about south central Kansas. They did see moisture, but they saw about 86% of their normal moisture for the week, and that brings them to about 90% of their normal moisture for the year to date. And that division is the only division that is below normal for the year to date.
And our temperatures have been roughly what you'd anticipate at this point of the season?
We were cooler than average to start the week, and in fact the week, which ended on Tuesday, ended colder than normal by about 3 to 4 degrees across the state. So it was a little bit on the cool side. We have seen some warming towards the end of the week and into this weekend. Not so much on the high temperatures. They topped out at about 88 degrees. But our low temperatures, the coldest reading across the state was 30 degrees up in Cheyenne County. In fact, all of the divisions saw lows in the 30s. The northwest region was the only one that dropped below freezing. But again, some very low temperatures, which means that we're not accumulating the growing degree days at the rates we would normally expect. So those that got their corn or beans in the ground are watching them kind of just sit there. Fortunately, the next week is expected to be warmer, and we've seen in these last couple of days where, again, our highs have not gotten particularly hot, but our low temperatures have moved into the 50, 60 degree range, which will help accelerate that crop growth.
Well, warmer temperatures may be in store, but apparently more of the same on the moisture side for the next several days.
Right. We do have a chance of rain just about every day going through the next week, maybe even to the end of May. We have a fairly stagnant weather pattern in place now, which means not everybody's going to see rain every day, but there is going to be a fair chance that someone's going to see it sometime. And in fact, in Manhattan, we're looking at a 30 or 40% chance every day for the next 10 days. So not necessarily widespread, but it's going to be kind of threatening around the area. We'll have to watch and see whether any severe weather develops out of it. But at this point, it looks mostly like those kind of drippy sky days with an occasional heavy downpour.
The expectation on quantity of precipitation next week?
Well, if we look at the quantitative precip forecast, the West is looking to get a break on it. They're looking at maybe a half an inch of rain, which would be nice, but not that excessive amount. Get into north central, northeastern Kansas, we're looking at somewhere upwards of 2 to 3 inches of rain. The south central and the southeast, they're in the 3/4 of an inch to an inch and a half range. So we'll see how that actually verifies as the storms move through the rest of this period.
Well, you tell us, Mary, that the forecast for the month of June as well as the 3-month outlook have both been posted.
Well, the outlook for June is calling for a good chance for warmer than normal temperatures statewide. On the precipitation side, it's a split decision, if you will. They're looking for an increased chance of wetter than normal conditions along the eastern edge of the state and drier than normal conditions along the western edge, with the central part of the state in equal chances of falling into either category.
That doesn't sound all that bad, as opposed to having drier than normal across the board during the summer.
That certainly is the case, and we should note that drier than normal does not necessarily mean that it would be unfavorable for production, because if you get it in a timely manner, it's actually going to be more beneficial than these excessive rains have been. So we'll just have to see how the distribution plays out, because that's going to be what's going to be important.
Some are saying, and on the heels of our recent persistent wet weather, that La Nina is all done. Is that the case?
The La Nina has faded, but we need to keep in mind that the La Nina impacts in Kansas during the summer are limited at best, so it really doesn't play a big role in a usual Kansas summer. We look at the ENSO, which is the El Niño Southern Oscillation projections, and at this point, they've got a fairly strong chance for the La Nina to return in the fall.
And that's where it hits us the hardest.
The later the onset of that, the less impact it might have. So if it rears its head in November, it's not going to have nearly the problematic impact that if it starts in August. And again, for us, La Nina in the fall tends to be hotter and drier than usual. Good for harvest, not so good for fall wheat establishment.
We will obviously keep an eye on it. Thanks as always, Mary, and enjoy the weekend ahead.
Thanks, Eric.
Mary Knapp, climatologist, K-State Research and Extension. Thanks to you as well for tuning in. Eric Atkinson here, bidding you a good weekend for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.